Hello and welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. As the global security environment becomes more unpredictable, Japan is reassessing its role on the global stage, from its post-World War II pacifist identity to a more assertive security posture. Regional pressures from China, North Korea and the Taiwan Strait, coupled with global shocks such as the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel-Gaza conflict, are reshaping Tokyo's strategic calculus. To discuss this and more, joining us now is Professor Yoichiro Sato, a professor of international relations at Ritsumeikan Asia-Pacific University in Beppu, Japan. Professor Sato is a leading voice on Japanese security policy, alliance politics and Indo-Pacific strategy. Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you on the programme. Let's get straight into it. Japan, of course, is entering a historic turning point in its post-World War II identity as it moves towards a more assertive security posture. Can Japan rearm without undermining its pacifist principles that have long shaped its democratic identity and its lessons learnt from participating in wars in the past?
Well, the security environment surrounding Japan is clearly worsening, and China's assertive behavior in the region, both in East Asia as well as South Asia, clearly the fundamental driver of this shift. The way Japan responds, however, still shows a lot of reservations, and Japan is trying to stay as much as possible with this defensive defense doctrine, which has continued to govern Japan's security policy pretty much throughout the post-World War II period. Having said that, however, some of the challenges Japan faces today is quite overwhelming when given these rapid changes due to China's behavior. For example, the security situation over the Taiwan Strait, which will likely have a direct implications on Japan's security, is deteriorating for various reasons, which I may not have enough time to elaborate. But also the China's enhancement of the ballistic missile forces, which has pushed Japan beyond the limit of simply developing capability to shoot them down. So Japan has already started the development of the counter-strike capabilities in the event Japan is attacked by such ballistic missiles, so that Japan could counter-strike some of the missile launching sequences in order to slow down the offense by China.
Professor Sato, of course, plenty of conflicts going on in the world in 2025, like the Russia and Ukraine war and Israel-Gaza conflict. How do conflicts like these shape Japan's view of deterrence, sovereignty and international law?
Well, initially, during the Abe administration of Japan, when Putin, for example, annexed Crimea and started showing his ambition toward Ukraine, Japan tried to keep distance from this issue, treating it as a European issue, and Japan focused on improving its own relationship with Russia and trying to move the negotiation over the disputed northern territory forward between Putin and Abe. But this attempt by Abe completely failed, and the succeeding the government, especially the government of Prime Minister Kishida, faced the direct invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and the Kishida brought Japan in line with the Americans and European sanction against Russia. So this consolidated the joint response by the Western powers. However, what is problem here is that the principle of sovereignty was directly challenged by the Russian invasion. And although China's trying to keep some distance from the Russian action, China is indeed backing up Russia economically by buying the sanctioned oil and gas from Russia. So it is quite concerning for Japan that Russia and China in recent years have been conducting joint military exercises around Japan, including the patrol activities by its bomber fleet surrounding the Japanese archipelago. So in that sense, Russia and China getting closer is really an alarming thing for Japan.
Yes, and how should Japan manage its increasingly fraught relationship with China while maintaining economic independence?
Well, yes, Japan and China are economically quite interdependent, and China is Japan's largest trade partner now, and Japanese number one source of import is China. A lot of Japanese companies have invested in China and producing products both for re-exporting as well as for sales inside China's domestic market. So the survival of the Japanese economy, quite a large extent, depends on how well the Chinese economy does. And even without the US trade war against China, the Chinese economy has been suffering since the major downturn which it suffered during the COVID-19 pandemic. And a lot of the long-term accumulation of economic problems, including the overly inflated the real estate market, which bursted in the last few years. The China is in a long-term economic slump, and this is coinciding with the effort, US-led effort to partially de-link China, especially in the domain of high-tech products. And Japan has signed on to this attempt to be more cautious about the trade of sensitive technological items, as well as transfer of militarily important technologies. So this is a careful balancing act between economic well-being and national security as far as the Japanese government is concerned.
And what role does Taiwan play in Japan's national security calculus, and how far do you think Tokyo is prepared to go to deter its coercion?
Okay. Taiwan is important basically for two reasons. One is that the US commitment to the defense of Taiwan has far-reaching implications in terms of the credibility of the alliance. Although Taiwan is technically not a U.S. ally in the sense that the U.S. does not recognize the Republic of China as a sovereign state. However, it's important that the U.S. has the so-called Taiwan Relations Act, which has enabled the U.S. president to provide arms to Taiwan, and also the U.S. government is committed to the peaceful resolution of whatever the Taiwan question is. So if China aggressively tried to merge Taiwan into the People's Republic of China, then the U.S. response through military means is very much expected, and U.S. allies also expect such a response by the U.S. The second importance is geopolitical, and the China's naval access to the open Pacific Ocean has been hampered by the so-called first archipelagic line, which connects the Japanese archipelago to the Okinawan chain of islands, to Taiwan and the Philippine archipelago. If Taiwan falls into the hands of the People's Republic of China, the People's Republic will have a free access into the open Pacific, utilizing naval bases in Taiwan. And that will fundamentally alter the geostrategic calculation of the United States as well as Japan. So Taiwan's the status quo is a very important security interest for countries like Japan and the United States.
And how was the US-Japan alliance evolved in response to China's rise, the Taiwan issue, North Korea's threats, and what are its limits?
Well, the US and Japan have been working on redefining the alliance since the end of the Cold War, or one might say even before. The most important feature is the growing security role of Japan within the alliance cooperation. So the previous alliance has been viewed as more or less one-sided, in which the US protects Japan, but Japan contributes little to the jointness of the alliance. I don't necessarily agree with this early assessment. However, it is also true that the role of Japan in terms of direct military contributions to joint activities between the US and Japan is on the rise. And for the Taiwan question, however, there's a lot of sensitivity, and the Japanese government has not been making explicit what are the permissible activities for Japan in the Taiwan contingency without having clear vision of how a contingency might prevail. So it's quite past dependent in that sense. But behind the scene, the officials between the US and Japan are closely discussing possible contingencies and studying various scenarios and necessary responses jointly by the Japanese and the US forces.
And where does Japan and India cooperation fit into Tokyo's broader Indo-Pacific strategy, strategic balance, or long-term partnership?
Well, the India-Japan cooperation in defense has been ongoing for about last 20 years, and India's joining into the Quad framework also anchored the closer cooperation with other security partners of Japan, like the United States and Australia. Having said that, however, India's interest in East Asia, the east of the Malacca Strait, is still somewhat limited, both for political reasons as well as for capability reasons. How can India project some of its naval forces in the event of Taiwan Strait contingency is pretty much a question of a capability which India currently lacks. For political reasons as well, India has seen the Taiwan Strait issue as something of a domain of diplomatic retaliation in case China messes with affairs of the Indian Ocean region, in which India doesn't want China to interfere. So in that sense, it really depends on how China behaves in the Indian Ocean region. If China behaves in a provocative way in the Indian Ocean region, then India's diplomatic response to the Taiwan Strait issues will become harsher. But as I said earlier, the direct military role of India over the Taiwan Strait contingency will be quite limited.
And what would the leadership of Japan's first female Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi, signal for Japan's domestic and foreign policy? And what is next for Japan in this new era?
The significance of the new Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi, is that she was the most preferred mentee of the late Prime Minister Abe. And following Abe, the key LDP leaders and the prime ministers they chose were trying to block Takaichi from emerging, and in the demise of late Prime Minister Abe, the Abe faction had lost influence within the ruling party, and many of them were implicated in some political campaign fund scandals. So it is significant that the Takaichi overcame those intra-ruling party obstacles and rode on the wave of popularity among the general voters in order to reach the position of prime minister. So for last several years, Japanese cabinets were not very popular and suffering from a low approval rate in the public, and they didn't last long. But Takaichi at the moment enjoys a very high popularity, and the rest of the party is forced to toe the line with Takaichi's conservative politics. So this is an opportunity for her and the Japanese government to further enhance close security cooperation with the United States. And Takaichi did a tremendous job of entertaining President Trump in the first meeting. And this has led to a very close working relationship between the U.S. and Japan, and some of the more difficult issues like sharing of the cost of stationing U.S. troops in Japan and so forth will be handled in this very close personal relationship between Takaichi and Trump.
Professor Yoichiro Sato, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us here on Focal Length. And with that, it's a wrap on this episode. For more international news and updates, stay tuned on NewsX World.